Steve Barrett, I'm the Editor-in-Chief of PRWeek. I'm delighted to be here with John Lampl, who's Vice President Corporate Communications for British Airways. John, welcome to PRWeek.
Thank you, Steve.
It's been quite a few weeks for you, I think it's fair to say. I mean, when you went into corporate communications, not that many years ago, did you ever imagine that you would have to deal with a volcano erupting and putting out flights for an extended period of time?
I have this expression, just when you think everything has happened, something else comes along. So even though the volcanoes, the first time that we've had this situation since I've been working, which is a pretty long time, but we've had disruptions of various kinds, whether it's weather-related or cabin crew strikes, or for whatever reason a runway closes because of bad weather, or there's a hole in the runway, these kinds of things. And so it's not uncommon being in the airline industry. You run into these
absolutely, and although you can't really predict a volcano, but you do have procedures for these sort of crisis communication situations. You have crew stranded all around the world, thousands of people. You have tens, hundreds of thousands of passengers. So what sort of things does that mean you've got to do for those people to ensure their well-being, but also to make sure you're getting your corporate reputation messages over as well?
Well, we kicked in a procedure automatically saying that if people had not progressed their trip, they hadn't flown out yet, they could either get a full refund or they could plan another day of departure with no penalty at all. We had a very open commercial policy. For those travelers that were stranded, we offered hotel accommodation at British Airways cost for every person and for each night that we didn't operate.
Okay, well clearly you're losing lots of money per day in a situation like this, because as you say, an airline seat is a perishable item. Once the plane is taken off or not, that ceases to exist. So you're losing possibly £20 million a day. When do you start to think, right, as a business, we've got to get back trading here, or we've got to get our planes in the air? But how do you weigh up that sort of dichotomy between getting back into trading and also safeguarding your passengers?
Well, we've come through a lot in the last 18 months. We had the global economy. 2 years ago, we had such high fuel prices that people weren't traveling. When the economy started trekking downwards, a lot of people just weren't flying. So last summer, we actually launched a program called Face to Face, which was to kickstart the business. And that helped to some degree. But then in the spring of this year, there was a cabin crew strike that impacted on British Airways, and that still is not resolved yet. And then we had the volcano. So some of these things were obviously within British Airways control, some were not. So you have to weigh up. But the whole thing is that you've got to get people traveling, so you have to price accordingly.
So what would you say to those who might have suggested that the airline industry was putting pressure on the governing bodies to get planes back in the air? I mean, what sort of talks are going on behind the scenes?
Well, first of all, the most important thing is safety. Safety is paramount. It will never be compromised. And we had to sort of prove to the UK government that it was safe to fly. Now, the UK government itself and the National Air Traffic Service had aircraft flying in the volcano, or the ashes in the atmosphere, and they determined that it was still unsafe. But by Sunday afternoon, April 18th, we actually flew a 747 out over the Atlantic 2 or 3 hours and came back. And all the measurements that were taken from the aircraft, from the engines that flew through the ash clouds, showed that there was no significant impact on those engines and it would be safe to operate. But when you're dealing, when a commercial organization such as British Airways, you have to negotiate with the government, and there again, the government held out for safety, and you really can't argue that point.
In fact, Willie Walsh, the chief executive, actually went up in a test flight.
He was indeed, yeah. Willie was on that Sunday afternoon flight. It was a 747 that we were taking from London to Cardiff, but what we did was we flew it out over the Atlantic, and it came back and landed at Cardiff. And the aircraft was analyzed, the engines were analyzed, and some of the data was sent up to Rolls-Royce engines in Derby. But our Director of Flight Operations, Captain Stephen Riley, and also Chief Executive Willie Walsh were on that airplane just to assure everybody that it was safe.
Absolutely, proving that they were going to walk the walk as well as talk.
Exactly.
And finally, you mentioned your face-to-face program, and Willie Walsh again has been doing some interesting work by doing direct communications via YouTube and almost cutting out traditional media. What's the thinking behind that, and how important was social media in this whole crisis in terms of communicating with your passengers?
Well, we tried to use Twitter and Willie's appearance on YouTube as much as possible. I think Willie did 2 YouTube presentations talking from our Ops Control Center about what was happening. First, that the volcano had disrupted operations in the European airspace. But then once we got going and once we started clearing out passengers, he again, because YouTube is just, it's all out there, everybody is watching this thing. So it was a really good way to get our message out there. In addition to the traditional media, I mean, we were passing on messages. We didn't do a lot of interviews, but we were just getting the message out by press release, by individual telephoning, traditional media, both broadcast and print, as fast as we could. We were in constant communication with our customers, telling them, look, go to the airport, your flight is going to leave. So through our website, ba.com, and through all the other social and traditional media, we got the message out as best we could. Now Willie, for example, today is flying to Phoenix to appear at an aviation symposium at Phoenix. Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport sponsors this thing. And he's on a panel, and I'm sure a lot of journalists are going to talk to him about, what was it like last week having to deal with this very, very sort of unnatural situation.
And it got you onto the front page of the New York Times, below the fold.
Below the fold.
John, thanks for joining us on PR Week Live.
Thank you very much.